A thought from the Alice Bailey books. One of the things she says, Alice Bailey, in her writings, one of the things that I seek to bring out in this story is the fact of this inner direction of world affairs and to familiarize more people with the paralleling fact of the existence of those who are responsible, behind the scenes, for the spiritual guidance of humanity and for the task of leading mankind out of darkness into light and from the unreal to the real and from death to immortality. And that really says a lot about the writings of her books.
You're listening to Canary Cry Radio. Now here are your hosts, Basil and Gonz.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Canary Cry Radio. My name's Basil.
And I'm Gonz. This is episode 13.
13.
Ooh. Cult number 13. But we wanted to talk a little bit.
Should we have skipped number 13 and gone straight to 14?
Maybe.
Like a really superstitious hotel.
Yes. But even though, like the hotel room, even if we called it episode 14, it would still really actually be episode 13. So
I know, logic is really terrible like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, we wanted to do an episode real quick on Alice Bailey's New World Order. And most people that are listening to this show probably have heard of the name Alice Bailey. She is an author. She channeled an entity named Dejois Cool and wrote a bunch of stuff. The most famous of her works is called The Externalisation of the Hierarchy, where she pretty much lays out how a new world order needs to be formed. So those books are really long, and she goes on forever, and you can get your hands on a copy online. You can get a PDF file. You just type in Externalization of the Hierarchy PDF, and you'll find a copy. We might include it just in the show notes that you can just link directly off of, just in case you're curious about her writing. And she also has a book called The Reappearance of the Christ, where she lays out what needs to happen in order for the Christ or the world teacher to reappear. Right. And she's not talking about Jesus Christ, the Christ. She's actually talking about the Christ as this person who's going to help usher in the new age.
Right.
And ironically enough, much of the description seems to fit what the Bible refers to as the Antichrist. So I don't know if she knew that or not, but
yeah, no, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But yeah, it's really interesting how she talks about the coming of the Christ. And she talks about it in terms, even some of the similar terms that a Christian would talk about the second coming of Jesus. But when you're reading it, it's almost like she hasn't heard of the Antichrist before. And that seems to be exactly what she's explaining when she talks about it, and which I actually find to be the case a lot when it comes to, New Agers or some of these other belief systems.
Or alternative spirituality.
Right. They start talking about how, the saviors are going to come, and it's just an exact description of the biblical Antichrist.
Right.
So we'll get into that a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, Alice Bailey, I guess she's written a lot of books, or I guess
channeled writings.
Channeled, yeah. She's had 19 books dictated to her by this entity called Dejois Cool, or the Tibetan, as I guess is his nickname or something. And then, it's funny. It's described as she's had 19 books dictated to her by this entity, and she's also written 5 of her own. So she's been at least involved in the writing of quite a few books.
Yeah.
And very interesting how these things have been put into play in regards to Freemasonry and alternative religions and occult systems and things like that, and especially the New World Order.
Yeah, and so just a real brief overview of who she is. She's born in the 1880s and she kind of had a troubled childhood. She tried to attempt suicide a couple times, and at the age of 15, she was approached by a mysterious stranger in a turban, and this entity called himself Kutumi, which is the same entity that contacted Helena Blavatsky in the earlier late 1800s to channel her writings. So,
this is more of a spiritual entity than a stranger on the street. Or?
I believe so.
Okay.
So, but who knows? I don't know. Maybe it was an actual person.
Really?
Yeah. Well, in any case, she traveled the world, did much kind of like how Helena Blavatsky did, if you've known anything about her. And she got to learn a lot of the mystic religions and all sorts of stuff and get a full view of what the ancient mysteries. And that's what she is sort of reinstating in especially her book, Externalisation of the Hierarchy. She's basically trying to reestablish this old, lost, ancient, mystic religion that she believes and her husband believes. Her husband was a Freemason, Foster Bailey. They believe is the original one world religion, the original religion of humanity. And this is the exact foundation for the New Age movement today. But it's also her writings are the foundation of our world leaders politically and economically that we see today. Guys like Henry Kissinger, you read his writings, and they just reflect everything she talks. I mean, it's almost word for word. So, instead of, the hierarchy, he'll use words like globalization,
Yeah, well, even in a lot of legislation and, even a lot of the documents of the UN, you find just a huge amount of, similarities and just the words and the phrases.
The language, yeah. And that would make sense because Alice Bailey and her husband started a company called Lucifer Publishing to publish her works. And they, of course, changed the name to Lucis Trust to make it a little more ambiguous. But they have been
Lucis Trust.
consultants of the UN for quite some time. So, I think there's a bio here that talks about how
some pretty major consultants for the UN.
Yeah. They take care of the meditation room in the UN headquarters and things like that. So anyway, there's a whole connection here with what the global goal is for a lot of these occult leaders that believe that they are doing humanity service. But again, from a biblical Christian point of view, it's like, yes, it's a great thing that they're doing to try to instill good and, help the world attain world peace, essentially.
Right.
However, it's kind of difficult to talk about because on one hand, it's like, yeah, it's great that you're trying to formulate world peace in this manner. But on the other hand, biblically speaking, it's like, we know this is playing into the hands of the Antichrist. It's literally establishing the foundation, the throne, if you will, for the Antichrist.
Yeah, and I mean it's another one of those difficult things. So with everything that is biblically prophesied, it's very intentionally done that these things that seem to be taking a step towards some sort of apocalyptic situation or the coming of the New World Order, it's very purposeful that they, in an earthly sense, seem so benign or so charitable and things like that. I mean, you read these things and it seems to be coming out of such a good place. Good intentions, talks about equality for everyone and, making sure that humans all have the same rights and material resources and things like this. But then there's just the small nuances that remind you that it's still about, that remind you that she's talking about the Antichrist and that she's talking about the New World Order and oftentimes a one world religion is stressed quite a bit and things like that. So it's very difficult to talk about them in negative terms for that reason. Because God knows we all want those, positive things to come about. But that's just all part of the great deception there. That
that was prophesied.
it's not going to come about, as such an evil thing, or else it would just never happen.
It would never happen, right? I mean, yeah, there's no way that like, here's the mark of the beast, the evil thing that was prophesied by Satan in the Bible, put it in your head. No, it's not going to happen like that. So,
all right, so here's the Antichrist, everyone.
He's the man that's going to destroy you.
Yes, yeah. So it's not going to come about like that, which would make it a lot easier for guys like you and me, Gonz.
Yeah, it would, huh? To try to, say, here comes the Antichrist. Well, no, duh, But yeah, it's much more clever. The Bible talks about Satan being a sly character. He's very slimy.
Well, that's
sneaky.
Yeah, right. And we'll talk about it a little bit later too. But in all of her writings, and which just follows the example of a lot of other esoteric writings and writings of the Freemasons and things like that, is that Lucifer is referred to many times and is referred to as, a bringer of light, the illuminated one, such a great guy, the prodigal son type character, alongside the Christ, which shows sort of a partnership between Lucifer and what they call the Christ, which is, again, totally biblical in the sense that, the Antichrist being what they refer to as the Christ, Lucifer and the Antichrist will be buddies. That is the case.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and before we jump in, what we wanted to do today is basically take a section of the book from the Externalization of the Hierarchy called Steps Towards a New World Order. And I mean, how blatant is that, right? If you're anyone that's looking into this. But before we jump in, I just wanted to quote real quick something that was written by Foster Bailey, Alice Bailey's husband, who was a Freemason, 32nd degree Freemason, I believe. And he wrote a book called The Spirit of Freemasonry. And just to kind of show the two hands at work here, there's kind of this government, political, economic, world stage, UN, that kind of persona. And then there's also the other side of the secret societies, Freemasonry being a very big proponent of that side of stuff. So Foster Bailey essentially says this about Freemasonry. He says that Masonry is the descendant of, or is founded upon, a divinely imparted religion. And then he explains that this religion was the first united world religion. Then came an era of separation of many religions and sectarianism. Yeah, there you go. Today we're working again towards a world universal religion. Revitalized Masonry, made up of Masons true to their obligations and realizing the mystic tie that binds them all together in one true brotherhood, would also provide a platform so universal that it would meet the need of thinkers of all kinds and of every school of thought. It would thus not only meet a religious need by providing a universal religion, but would also satisfy the mental need felt by all broad-minded thinkers for this time. And it really goes to show this whole thing that I just quoted is predicated on the idea that Lucifer is actually the good guy, trying to reestablish this united world religion, this lost mystic tie of man being brotherhood, man being brothers.
Right.
Because in their view, again, I think we've mentioned it before, but Lucifer is the good guy, Yahweh God is the bad guy. Adam and Eve were trapped in the Garden of Eden, and Lucifer came, gave them knowledge of good and evil to become like gods and be free from the garden. That's their perspective on what's going on. So
right. And even not so much that Yahweh was the bad guy, but that Yahweh is kind of dumb.
Right.
Is what they think. He thinks that he's sort of just a bumbling sort of deity who isn't quite as enlightened as some of the other deities.
Right.
Which I think is even more deceptive than saying that he's evil. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you.
So anyways, that's just a detail. But yeah, and I think it's interesting because both you and I know some Freemasons personally in our lives there outside of internet voices. talking through podcasts.
We don't have lives outside.
But you know, one of my childhood friends is now a Freemason, very low level Freemason, and it's funny because I'm friends with him on Facebook, and he's always posting things about basically showing how he hasn't been what's the word?
He's not like a Satan worshiper.
Yeah, exactly. He spends all this time being like, oh, all these people are stupid for thinking that Freemasons, you know, worship Satan, and all I do is just do chores for all the other Freemasons, you know, because he's sort of just like a little neophyte in the in the organization right now. But then you've come in contact, or you know, somebody who was a 32nd degree Freemason.
Yes, I do. I was in a small group thing here at church, and you know, I didn't know until we started talking about some of these things that he was a 32nd degree Freemason. And even him, he was very apologetic towards Freemasonry in general, saying, oh, you know, we were just trying to help the community. It's kind of like a big fraternity. It's like a worldwide fraternity is kind of how he explained it.
Right.
But what's interesting with even, I did a little poking. I was like, hey, look, you know, I've read these things. You know, who knows if it's true? It's all secondhand stuff. What did you experience? You know, and he would say, you know, there's some weird rituals and weird, strange things going on. But he was saying that a majority of the times when he would go to the meetings, it would just be really boring, you know. And I can imagine if they're doing some kind of paganistic, you know, mystic ritual, it's not going to be the most exciting thing. You know what I mean? You're sitting there and someone's reading off a piece of paper or something, and they tell everybody to close their eyes or look at the ceiling. And I mean, I don't think when you're in it, you're sitting there going, oh my goodness, this is, you know, the most evil thing in the world. It's more of like, wow, this is really boring. You know, I wish we can just go on with doing other stuff.
Right. Well, didn't he even say, didn't you guys have a conversation about the satanic, quote unquote, aspect of Freemasonry? Or did I make that up?
I think you made that up. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
No. He did come in contact with folks that were really powerful because he was being recruited to be a 33 degree Freemason. So they wanted him to do all this stuff, all this service. He even made a video, which he said he was going to let me borrow and check out. And he's like, there's nothing sinister about it, you know, trying to kind of play it off or whatever.
Right.
But he basically made a video of how the Freemasons are stewards of the community and something along those lines, where he was playing it on loop. They had a booth at some kind of local fair or something. And I mean, very, you know, seemingly very innocent stuff. But in the process of being recruited to being that 33rd degree Freemason, and I don't think every 33rd degree Freemason is a privy to all the information in general.
Right. Well, because the Illuminati is a brotherhood within the brotherhood.
Right, exactly. So once you're in, then they start, you know, I'm sure they start kind of fizzling out who actually gets to be part of. And I think when it gets down to it, it's very selective in that, you know, you have to have bloodlines and whatnot that jive with the whole agenda. But anyway, he was basically telling me that there are people that he ran into that were very deep into Freemasonry, top level, high level guys that were extremely arrogant to the point where it made him feel uncomfortable. Right. Because he was saying that they felt like they were so powerful that if they wanted an economic crisis in China, done. If they wanted some kind of natural disaster to hit India, done. Like the amount of power they held, and arrogance really was the word that he was using.
Right.
He said was astounding, blew him away. They told him about some of the technology they have, which basically he was describing smart dust to my friend here that knew, or that was a Freemason, saying that they can sprinkle dust from, you know, airborne planes or whatnot, and basically they would get caught in your skin and they can track you and whatnot. I mean, that's smart dust. That's what it is.
Right. I mean, yeah.
And I think this was late 1990s that he was. So this is, you know, this wasn't like a couple of years ago. This was a good decade and a half ago.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, because that smart dust was just recently declassified.
Right.
As being used in the hunt for Obama. Not Obama. Oh, God. Osama a few years back. Oh,
well, maybe. Well, okay. Well, anyway, yeah. So again, even the people that are in the circles of Freemasonry don't know really what's going on. And it's not their fault. I guess the dangerous thing with having a show like ours, Basil, is that people are going to say, oh, you guys are just, calling everybody who's a Freemason is a Satan worshiper.
Right.
And that's not what we're saying. We're saying the deception runs deep. It's layers upon layers of deception. Not that we know it all. We don't know it all, obviously. We don't know where it begins and where it ends. But we do know that what is being promoted within the circles is not exactly what it seems to be. So.
Exactly.
All right. So let's jump into this list. Steps towards a new world order as written out by Alice Bailey. There is 9 steps, and we're going to go through each one, see how it's been implemented, or if it has or hasn't been, or see if we can't see or figure out if it's actually been part of culture since it was penned, which I believe, boy, we should have this information ready. I believe it was the 1920s or 30s when this was penned.
Right.
Yeah, that's something we probably should have ready, but we don't. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think 1 and 2 are the most relevant, especially in the context of the coming 2012 Olympics, which I think is getting a lot of attention right now for its possibilities regarding the switch over to a new world order, some sort of false flag terror or pandemic or what have you, alien unveiling or something of this nature. It's funny. Just the other day I was with my friend and I turned to him and I said, just so it's on record, I think something crazy is going to happen this year at the Olympics. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I just want it to be on record. So when it happens, you will know.
You will know that we knew. And then they'll point the finger at us and be like, wait.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was us. Well, yeah. Okay. So let's get into the list, I guess.
Okay. So number 1, the New World Order must meet the immediate need and not be an attempt to satisfy some distant idealistic vision.
Boom.
Yes.
Yeah. So this one I thought, just right off the bat hit me very hard because the fact that it number 1, the New World Order must meet the immediate need and not an attempt to satisfy some distant idealistic vision. So it just right there, it shows that it's going to, it needs to come through some sort of catastrophe or something like that.
Right.
Some need that is so great and that needs to be met immediately that the New World Order would come about as the only solution to that need. And we've seen it happened many times before in history where that's how things come about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huge changes in government or social systems or anything like that always come through just a
time of chaos.
A time of chaos, and that's sort of where this quote unquote order can be brought by bringing in this radical new system. It was how it was with the Nazis. That's how it's been with, the Patriot Act and 9/11 and everything like that. It's just how the world works. So I think it's very interesting that step 1 has been, we see it happen time and time again in even recent history.
Yeah, and it's interesting also that biblically speaking, it talks about how Satan knows his time is short. And there's this kind of like, okay, let's get it going, let's get it moving. This I wouldn't say panic, but more of
urgency.
Urgency, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, to create this thing. And what's funny is before she creates the list, she kind of gives this caveat type thing where she goes, well, in throughout history, people have had all sorts of ideas and utopian dreams, but none of them are tangible. But here's a list of things that we can do. And what's funny is that first thing is.
Your utopia is impossible. Let me tell you about my utopia.
Exactly. The idealistic vision.
Right.
But playing off what you said about how it has to come through some kind of crisis, number 2 states the New World Order must be appropriate to a world which has passed through a destructive crisis and to a humanity which is badly shattered by the experience.
Yeah. Just right there. As step number 2 to bringing about the New World Order, it doesn't scream cynicism, but it's a very cynical way of, if you have this thing that you want to bring about and you know that the only way to do it is through a disaster so destructive that humanity is badly shattered by the experience. Humanity is shattered by the experience. It just shows such it's almost under the skin of the whole, goodness of bringing about the New World Order, just the fact that it needs to be born of fire.
Right. And it makes a lot of sense to, I believe, what is going on now with the Middle East and the Holy War and trying to create wars in general, because obviously religious war is probably going to be a very big proponent in bringing about a New World Order, just because it's going to cause destruction. It's going to cause all sorts of chaos. If we go into World War III, it's going to cause people to say enough is enough with religion, war, all that stuff. We need something different. And I would say another world war would be a destructive crisis.
Right.
that is going to cause humanity to be so badly shattered by the experience that they're going to all desire something new, something different to come save them.
Well, okay. And here's something else. I don't know if I showed this to you, Gani, but let me start off with putting in the context of the 2012 London Olympics. And in past episodes, we've talked about the Illuminati card game, which portrays a scene to be representative of, Big Ben falling and the Olympic colors running away from this disaster.
Right.
And there's a huge amount of buzz right now about some sort of false flag thing, or an alien visitation, or even a pandemic starting at the 2012 Olympics. But on the subject of a world war stemming from that, there's this new commercial from China going around the internet, and I haven't had the time to check its validity or really look into it that much, but we'll try to post it in the show notes. But basically, there's this commercial airing in China, and it takes place at the London Olympics during a soccer game. And it's a soccer game between China and some other country. I don't think it's specified. And it's sort of done in sort of an anime type animation style where it's very intense. And suddenly, during this soccer game, the strangest thing starts happening, where a war breaks out in London during the soccer game. I mean, there's bombs going off, there's tanks rolling around, there's squadrons of men with machine guns fighting each other, and this soccer game is still going on. And then, even stranger things start happening where, the Chinese soccer players sort of transform or are sort of aided by spiritual entities, one of them being sort of like a lion. And this spiritual lion figure is not quite possessing, but sort of aiding the soccer player in the battle, in the soccer game. And this sort of little demonesque, or not little, large demonesque bird spiritual being is sort of helping out the enemy soccer player. And so there's this huge war going on outside of the stadium. And I'm talking bombs, airplanes, tanks. I'm pretty sure it shows Big Ben crumbling as well. And so all this is happening during the soccer game. The soccer game itself is sort of portrayed as this sort of spiritual battle. And during the whole thing, there's this guy like singing some epic song in Chinese. And it's just the most bizarre thing to watch. And allegedly, this commercial is being aired in China. And so it's got a lot of people nervous, I think would be the right word to use, thinking that, China is trying to send a message or something that, a world war is going to stem, or they have plans for starting, whatever it may be. I mean, at that point, it's all up for speculation. but the commercial is just so eerie. It's funny at first because they're like, oh my gosh, this is this is so reminiscent of they would have this playing in there. It's so, trying to scare the rest of the world and being afraid of their soccer
nationalism.
team. Yeah, exactly. But then you watch it and you're like, holy crap, why are those tanks blowing up Big Ben? Why are there men in black jumpsuits with machine guns like breaking into the stadium while this soccer game is? I'm so confused right now, and it's sort of making me nervous. You know what I mean? It's kind of that situation, and we'll try to find it and we'll post it in the show notes, but it's just bizarre.
And I've actually heard about the commercial also. I haven't seen it myself.
Right.
But that can serve as propaganda for sure. Definitely.
Right. And so it's just very interesting, and especially in the context of everything else. But anyways, we can move on.
Okay. That is really interesting, actually. Now I'm curious to watch it.
Yeah.
The human crisis. One last point I wanted to make off number 2, and it'll kind of tie into number 3, is that the real New World Order is not going to be something that is forced upon the people.
Right.
It's going to be something the people desire. And that's the same thing with the mark of the beast. It's not going to be, a gun to your forehead saying, if you don't take the mark, you are dead. It's more like, why wouldn't you take the mark?
Right.
Like, are you crazy? You must be nuts to not want to be part of this new global peace. And so number 3 kind of ties into that. The New World Order must lay the foundation for a future world order, which will be possible only after a time of recovery, of reconstruction, and of rebuilding. And part of that, I believe, is going to be the destruction of what appears to be the Illuminati or the global elite. I believe there's going to be something that is going to cause the world to believe that the actual, quote unquote, what we believe is kind of like the New World Order or the Illuminists or whatever you want to call them, there's going to be something that appears to be that they are defeated, that they have lost control or lost power of the influence they have upon humanity. And that's going to be part of the recovery, reconstruction, rebuilding. That's, it's kind of a gut feeling, but I know guys like David Wilcock just recently in the last few months have come out and said, all these Illuminists are getting arrested by the national something or other. And, he's saying that he's getting it from a source, but in the past I've seen that he, I think he was misled and there are some plants that went in there and gave him some information that wasn't necessarily correct.
You're right. I heard about all this.
Yeah. So I would imagine that that's kind of either a test run or setup to kind of what he hopes for is like this defeating of the Illuminati. Same with David Icke. He's out there saying, we have to find ourselves. We must defeat this order and da-da-da. And same with Alex Jones and all these guys. They're kind of almost playing into it. It's almost playing into that plan, which is very interesting. It's an angle that people don't discuss very often.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a natural thing to try to want to go defeat them. I think it's a lot more complicated than getting them arrested and things. That's what sort of makes me sort of hesitant about the whole thing. And I know we've talked about it before that, trying to slay an invincible dragon is just sort of So, I mean, that remains to be seen, I think, whether if it's even possible for Illuminists to be taken to justice by any system that's already in place.
Because they run the system.
Right, precisely. And even if they are, I believe it could just be, just an act.
A play.
Right.
Another scene in the play.
Right.
Yeah. If we're talking about conspiracies, what better way than to make people believe that the bad guys lost?
Well, exactly. Yeah. Other than they've taken a good page right out of Satan's book there, which is, the greatest thing to do is to just convince your enemies that you don't exist.
Right.
And they've done a great job of convincing a lot of people that they do not exist.
Right.
So.
And actually, I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and they were saying the conversation was like, it started off as like a political conversation of like, oh, this guy came out, he was bashing Obamacare, and he was bashing the liberals and all this stuff. And, I said, well, I think the whole Democrat Republican thing is a little bit less about two ideologies that are so completely opposite in America, but just, two sides of the same coin. It's kind of like a distraction, as I think the use I use, a major distraction for the American people to believe that they really have influence in these different parties and stuff.
Right.
And so he kind of pressed on, and he was like, well, then, what's the agenda? Who really runs the world and all this stuff? And I'm like, well, I can tell you who I believe it is at the very top. And this person wasn't a Christian or believer. He was actually an atheist. So you can imagine just the fireworks going off there in the conversation. But, I essentially told him, from my worldview, I believe Satan is actually the one who runs the system, and he uses deception to make his, plan come to fruition. And, he's like, well, give me names of people. And I said, well, there's a lot of speculation out there with people like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, those are really big names, and Bilderberger. Yeah. So there's all these names out there, and, and he turns around and he goes, well, see, you don't know. You don't even know. It's just all speculation. You don't know that. And so it's like, well, yeah, I can't tell you exactly who, but that would defeat the purpose of there being somebody that's behind the scenes pulling the strings if people knew about it, or people knew exactly who it was.
Right.
In other words.
Well, and and there's people like Alex Jones and such who do their own sort of, investigation or badgering or whatever, who have a nice list of people who they have as belonging to certain groups.
And even then, those guys aren't necessarily the ones running it. They're probably the gears, that are actually making the things happen.
Exactly.
To externalize these ideas, but they aren't the ones coming up with it.
Right. Right.
So anyway, let's move on. Number 4, and it gets a little bit more utopian as we go along here. Number 4, the New World Order will be founded on the recognition that all men are equal in origin and goal, but that all are at differing stages of evolutionary development. That personal integrity, intelligence, vision, and experience, plus a marked goodwill, should indicate leadership. The domination of the proletariat over the aristocracy, the bourgeoisie as in Russia, or the domination of an entrenched aristocracy over the proletariat and middle classes, as has been until lately the case in Great Britain, must disappear. The control of labor by capital, or the control of capital by labor must also go.
Right. So, okay. Yes. This is pretty straightforward. Basically just talking about how government systems have been so corrupt and wrong as of late, and people who have integrity and intelligence and vision and experience and goodwill should be in charge, which are all things that make sense.
Yeah, most people would probably agree with that.
So in this way, I almost see it less of a exclusive big plan type thing, in that, yes, that would be very nice if all of those things were not happening. And that does sound very utopian at the same time.
Well, the irony here is it's kind of like that self-defeating thing. I think the law of non-contradiction, which it's not exactly that, but sort of along those lines, where you're saying everyone is equal, everyone must be da-da-da, but she's actually pointing it out, saying everyone has to be equal.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, but what about you saying that everyone has to be equal? Aren't you enforcing your view upon the world? If, I don't know, I might be getting a little too philosophical here, but I agree with you that most people on the surface would read this and go, oh yeah, totally. There's so much corruption. There's so much alleged evil happening in our governments and the way our political status and just the hierarchy is set up, that needs to be destroyed. And yeah, on the surface, it's very easy to point that out.
Right. Well, she talks about she sort of gets a little poetic and paradoxical in here. She says the dominion of the proletariat over the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie. Well, I mean, that's talking about the proletariat being sort of a working class or a lower class.
Right.
The dominion of the proletariat over the aristocracy or the bourgeoisie. Okay, so the lower class.
Is that kind of like a democracy?
Well, this is saying like the dominion, like the lower class being in charge and ruling, the aristocracy or bourgeoisie is sort of a utopian democracy, not sort of the democracy that actually exists in America or anything like that.
Even though that's not
the idea of the masses sort of appointing the leadership.
Right.
But then it goes on to say, or the dominion of the aristocracy over the proletariat and middle classes.
Right.
So both of these, democracy and or I don't know, whatever, patriarchal society or even communism could fit on that one. On the second one, the dominion of the entrenched aristocracy over the proletariat must disappear. So it talks about, I mean, any way that we have seen governments or social construction exist must disappear. And the control of the labor capital or the control of the capital over the labor also must go. So she's talking about nobody being in charge of anybody. Right. Basically.
Well, that's why I thought it was ironic that she's actually pointing this out. Because she's essentially saying that I'm above all you guys. Well, Dejua Kul, the spiritual entity, the ascended master who is so wise. And, he's the one that's giving this information. So for this to actually take place, there has to be a third party involved. In other words, there has to be something like I don't know, an alien disclosure or some kind of third party to come in and say, hey guys, you guys have been doing this all wrong. Let me show you how it's done type of thing.
Right. And that's exactly what it's getting at, is that there must be a third party that is outside of the current social construction.
Right. It's like, I've heard this analogy. I think it was Standeo that talked about it, but if you have a couple brothers or sisters playing in the bedroom and, your dad says, through the door, hey, if you guys don't be quiet, I'm going to come in there with my belt, and they continue doing it. As soon as the dad actually walks in with the belt, two kids are, the kids that were fighting are all of a sudden best friends, That's the kind of idea here.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Let's jump to number 5. Number 5, in the New World Order, the governing body in any nation should be composed of those who work for the greatest good of the greatest number and who at the same time offer opportunity to all, seeing to it the individual is left free. Today, the men of vision are achieving recognition, thus making possible a right choice of leaders. It was not possible until this century. And she's writing this in the 19th century, so...
Right. I mean, this is another one of those ones that's, I mean, it seems fairly straightforward. It just saying that the government should work for the greatest good of the greatest number of people without taking away the rights of those who, are in the minorities. It says, today, the men of vision are achieving recognition, thus making possible a right choice of leaders. So what she's saying here is, the men who are going to make this happen are obvious today. These men are achieving the recognition right now. Right. And so this is making the choice of leaders possible. And I sort of see this as, if we're looking at steps towards creating a new world order, it sort of seems like she is trying to hint at, creating a power structure right now.
Right.
With the men that are alive at the time of doing this. So this has been the case for centuries, which is, it's because the New World Order sort of has the mindset of, even though we might not see it in our lifetime, this is what our life goal is. People have been working towards this with complete knowledge that they'll never see it, referring to especially the forefathers of America, the United States, where they went through just excruciating amount of energy and detail to create this new Atlantis, basically, that they were not going to see the benefits of. And so I see that as she's talking about the men of vision in her day when she's writing this, to put them in leadership so we can keep working towards this, because it wasn't possible until now.
Yeah, and she calls this group of goodwill, I guess the world leaders of goodwill, or I can't remember the exact phrase she uses, but essentially it's the world servers. That is, I think, what she calls it.
Right. For
goodwill, and again, it's kind of like it's building the throne almost. Again, from the biblical perspective of the hierarchy, and it's so interesting because you look at the seal, right, of America, and you have that pyramid, and you have the eye, the all-seeing eye, and the cap is the cornerstone, right. And then there's like the 13, the capstone, and the 13 steps of the rest of the pyramid there. It's almost like building that structure.
Yeah, and it's also establishing bloodlines.
Yeah.
Because the whole leadership of the thing is going to be brought about through bloodlines. It's a very common thing. I mean, you can work your way up as high as you want, but you're not really going to be let into the inner circle unless you're of the correct bloodline. Right. Which keeps the inner circle from invaders. I mean, if you really think about it, if we really wanted to infiltrate the establishment of, whatever it may be, the Illuminati or what have you, what would we do? We'd, get somebody young to start working their way up and spend their whole lives becoming a 33-degree Freemason. Right. And so now they're in, and we can take it down from the inside. Well, they thought about this already, and this was, I'm sure they learned by experience or something. But even if you work your butt off your entire life, unless you are of the correct bloodline, you're not going to truly make it into what we consider the inner circle.
The inner circle, yeah.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. All right. Let's keep going on. Number 6. The New World Order will be founded on an active sense of responsibility. The rule, which is interesting, all for one and one for all. This attitude among nations will have to be developed. It is not yet present. Right.
I think that's pretty straightforward.
Very straightforward. I think, again, it's the same idea. This view of, and I always go back to like my philosophical senses when I hear stuff like this or read stuff like this, because to suggest that there's a rule,
right.
It's supposed to be something that is, in the previous couple steps, it was like, everyone's free. Everyone has, they're all part of being treated fairly. There's no overbearing government or leader trying to, or at least within humanity, everyone has to work together. This kind of idea, again, it's a kind of a utopian idea. But then she proposes a rule, right. All for one, one for all. So if you actually are not part of it, if you think, actually, no, I don't know if I want to be part of this thing, you're breaking the rule. Right. Which is, yeah.
And I'm sure there will be severe consequences to any nation or any, I mean, as we've already seen, if nations don't want to play by, for instance, America's rules, they pay the consequences.
Absolutely.
If a country is not working for the national interests of America, they do pay the price.
Right. No, that's very true. That's exactly how things have gone in the world stage of, military action in other countries and things like that.
Right. And that's going to be the case when this thing comes along, and we'll see in the next few steps. She stresses nations, still holding their quote unquote sovereignty and things like that. But again, if they're not obeying the rule, then there's going to be a price to pay. It's sort of like, and I brought this up last time. I just finished rereading 1984. And in 1984, if you're a part of the party, there are no laws per se.
Right.
You're not necessarily restricted from anything. And in their case, things like sex for fun, or all sorts of, what people would consider free will type things, or, not liking the party being the political party, or even owning things like paper and pens, and writing things that aren't for the furthering of the political party. Anyways, these things are not unlawful per se, but if you do take part in any of these things, you're going to die. They're going to kill you.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's sort of that same thing. Just because there are no quote unquote laws or rules doesn't mean that there's not a punishment for them.
Right.
And that's sort of how I see this. It's, hey, we're all going to be quote unquote helping each other out, all for one and one for all.
But if you don't.
Right. This attitude among nations will have to be developed. Yeah. It is not yet present.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
You don't want to cooperate with us? Well, we're going to come in there with guns and make you.
We'll have to develop this this attitude for you.
Boy. Okay. Let's move on. Number 7. And there's 9 steps, so a couple more here. The New World Order will not impose a uniform type of government, a synthetic religion, and a system of standardization upon the nations. The sovereign rights of each nation will be recognized, and its peculiar genius, individual trends, and racial qualities will be permitted full expression. In one particular, only should there be an attempt to produce unity, and that will be in the field of education.
Right. And this is funny. I find this to be, it's almost paradoxical. I feel like if you read it on the outside, and it sounds great because there's this big concern about losing, national identity, ethnic history, things like this. And we talked about this, I think, in the beginning of the show. But here's the thing. What would destroy all of that? And what has been destroying ethnic
diversity and identity? Yeah.
Yeah. It's been the unification of education.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Education rules the minds of the populace.
Right.
So if you are producing unity in the education all around the world, you are creating a one world culture. You see what I mean here?
Yep. The education becomes the foundation to instill the culture, or it becomes the culture.
It becomes the culture.
Right.
I mean, in education, and, I'm not saying I know the plans for whoever's going to be doing the unifying of this education, but that's part of the continuation of cultures is the educational uniqueness of that culture.
Right.
That keeps it going. And so, like I was saying, a lot of these steps and parts of these steps sound wonderful. She talks about how each nation will be, quote unquote, sovereign, and they all have their particular genius, and individual trends and racial qualities will be permitted full expression, except that we're going to control all of the education.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's almost like, if you're just reading it, and to, a normal person not looking into it really, or seeing it for what it really is, it sounds wonderful. And of course, we're going to buy into this whole thing.
All right. And education is kind of it's so broad. It's not just, it doesn't say science
it doesn't,
or mathematics or, it's not specific. It's just education, the field of education.
Right.
So, I mean.
Well, and that could be anything. That could be religious education. That could be cultural education, like we've been talking about. It could even be the conditioning of social norms, the conditioning of behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all part of it.
It kind of reminds me of the movie Gattaca. Have you seen that movie? I think we've brought it up before. I think I have the DVD. I'll let you borrow it. But
thanks.
I'm letting you borrow a lot of stuff.
It's the Canary Cry movie club.
Movie club. And I'm sure some people have seen Gattaca. It's basically set in the future where, everyone's genetically engineered, designer babies, basically. And the main character of the film was not born in a test tube, basically. He was a natural birth.
Right.
But anyway, everybody there was educated in a specific way. Like everybody had just because also they were born into this culture and society, they had this like level of education where there's like this room where everybody's on computers and all this stuff. And that's just kind of what it reminds me of, you know,
Right.
everyone's going to have the same education, which means everyone's going to have part of education though, in my opinion, is supposed to be, at least in essence, what you do when you go to school is you're supposed to learn how to think, right? You're supposed to learn how to, you know, think critically or
Reason,
to analyze and reason.
Yeah, it's where you get your skills of logic.
Right, exactly.
For the most part.
So if it's shaped in a certain way and it's controlled, your entire view of how you're going to think about the world is going to be shaped, and therefore,
Oh, absolutely, they're controlling the worldview.
Yeah.
And here's another thing. It says there should only be the only attempt to produce unity will be education,
right?
Essentially. So it doesn't say that everybody's education is the same,
right?
It just means that the development of, you know, an educational system will be geared towards, you know, whatever they think unity is,
right?
And it is sort of like Gattaca or even Brave New World.
Brave New World, yep. Same
where
thing,
everybody, depending on their caste or their particular role, get whatever amount of education that they need in order to work for the system or the machine.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So, and that's the thing. If you're controlling education, you are literally controlling the minds of the people. And that was a whole nother thing. And
well, even look at like Nazi Germany, same thing, right? I mean, they controlled the education system and, you know, indoctrinated a bunch of people to accept the Nazi regime. But anyway, let's move on.
Okay.
Number 8, the New World Order will recognize that the produce of the world, the natural resources of the planet and its riches belong to no one nation, but should be shared by all. There will be no nations under the category haves and others under the opposite category. They could have just said have-nots.
I know.
A fair and properly organized distribution of the wheat, the oil, and the mineral wealth of the world will be developed based upon the needs of each nation, upon its own internal resources and the requirements of its people. All this will be worked out in relation to the whole.
Right. Now, this, okay. Again, is this one of the things that just sounds so great? It sounds like, you know, some sort of utopia where whatever we have is just split up between everybody. And again, I'm not against everybody having what they need. That is not what we're against here. What I am against is using a utopian idea to sort of bring about something that is not so. For instance, I mean, this is basically socialism.
This is socialism, I was going to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And for the most part, pure socialism has not worked in the world. And the reason is because they're talking about how, you know, there are no haves or have-nots. Well, okay, a fair and properly organized distribution of the wheat, oil, and minerals, wealth of the world will be developed based upon the needs of each nation.
Who defines the needs?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, if you have some third world country and then you have a first world country, all right, the third world country obviously has needs.
Yep.
And the problem is establishing what the answer is to those needs. It creates a tyranny almost where deciding what those people need, you know?
Yeah, because, okay, so think about it this way. Like, this is like a perfect example. If you let's see, when there's a divorce of like celebrities, you know, some of the money gets split or whatever based on the lifestyle or the level of consuming the person does. So like, yeah, so like, let's say the wife or whatever has been living on, you know, I don't know, 10 grand a week or something ridiculous, right? Well, once the divorce is finalized or whatever, to be fair, to split off, you know, the rich guy or whatever is going to have to pay whatever is going to supplement
her lifestyle.
So yeah, it would be based on the lifestyle. People would get what they're used to. So if we compare that, let's say with like Africa, let's pick, you know, like Uganda or something, with California, the needs, like we need, like, okay, let's say the people in Uganda need what? They need clean water. They need food, like basic food.
Right.
They need shelter and clothing. I mean, like the bare minimums, and they would be stoked, right?
That's exactly the point. Yeah.
Yeah. In California, it's, obviously a little different.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. This step 8, it makes it sound like everybody in the world would be brought up to the same living standard.
Right.
That's what it sounds like it wants to do, on the surface level is, people in Africa living the same relative lifestyle as people in California. All right. And that's great. I want everybody to have a great life, the best life that they possibly can. But the problem with that is that won't be how it is. People looking at Africa and then people looking at California, well, they'll look at Africa and they'll say, all right, well, they need clean water. They need, a hut, and they need some running water, and they need electricity.
Yep. Right.
And the history of socialism says that they will get the bare minimum of that.
Right.
Without taking away from the richer populace. That's the thing, because the richer populace aren't going to want to lose what they have already.
Right.
As selfish as that is, I'm sorry to say, but that will never happen. They will never reduce Californians to living in, less than what they're used to in order to bring up the less fortunate Africans.
Yeah.
And so what you have here is it's almost just false promises, because, for instance, the people in charge are going to be the Californians, or they're going to be the New Yorkans, or they're going to be, those types of people. So I'm not saying that this is a bad idea. I'm not saying that number 8 is, I don't want everybody to, have what they need.
Right.
What I'm saying is number 8 is a lie. And it's the same lie that has brought about socialism in other times in history and in other places that just simply has not worked.
Yeah.
And just simply won't work. Just for the mere fact that the human condition won't allow it to work.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the bottom line. And if you've ever seen Zeitgeist Moving Forward, which is, it was, obviously the guy who made Zeitgeist, Peter Joseph, made that movie, and it's a big hit. It came out, I think, a year ago or so. Millions of views all over the world. And essentially, the movie promotes this right here, number 8, where everybody gets what they need. They don't, there's no preference. There's no such thing as like, I like steak, so I want steak. There's no, that none of that stuff exists anymore. It's everyone gets their needs. And, the idea that's proposed is that through people getting what they need, everyone's going to be happy. And it's, again, like you said, the bottom line, the human condition doesn't allow that. There's always going to be people that want more, that will do something to want more, that will do whatever it takes, kill, murder, whatever it is to gain what they want, their selfish desires. And, I think it also points out the incredible hypocrisy of just in general with humanity. Because we're sitting here, we would love to see everybody have what they need in life, but then it's not the easiest thing to just like, okay, well, I'm going to not pay rent. And I don't know, just the way our lives have established, where we are. I don't know where I'm going with that.
Well, it's the same thing. It's going to be, and then who's doing the deciding? Well, the people doing the deciding are obviously going to have a lot more.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just there's always a ruling class that isn't subject to its own rules.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of.
And it's always happened in socialism. It always becomes, instead of a lower middle high class, it's a high class, and then everybody else. It's everybody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Again. I really don't want people to think that we're not for, helping out the poor.
I know.
Wanting everybody to be on the same level, because that would be great.
Yeah.
But socialism is not the way to do it. It honestly is through charity and the love of Christ and the, things like that. That I think, if if more people would buy into that sort of thing.
Well, I think helping others in general is just something we should just do. And under, again, like you said, the love of Christ and what we're told we're supposed to do as Christians, being salt and light into the world, that's just part of the fabric of who we're supposed to be.
Right.
Not because we want some kind of political system to be in place, not because, putting yourself aside, that self-sacrificial element is, I think, the key to Christianity in general. And that kind of, that characteristic, taking on that characteristic just automatically gives us the desire to help others.
Exactly.
Not for any particular reason or for any self gratification or self gain.
Right. And that's one thing that drives me crazy is, true Christianity, true the following of Jesus Christ. You have people talking about how Christianity is why there is so much poverty in the world, and why there's so much separation in classes, and how the Christians are the ones who, put us against them and things like that. And number one, sadly, there are a lot of cases where that is true.
Right.
But secondly, if truly, everybody started living by a Christ-centered worldview and a Christ-centered, philosophy, honestly, all of these problems, if you ask me, would go away. The very basis of a Christ-centered lifestyle is helping everyone out and putting everyone before yourself.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the antithesis of that is being preached by New Agers and atheists and things and things like that.
Right, and I've often said the very simple teaching of Jesus of like turn the other cheek.
Right.
If everyone turned the other cheek, there would be nobody left to actually slap the cheek. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
And it would actually create this idealistic world that everyone strives for in general.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the difference. I mean, it's almost as if Alice Bailey here has the same sort of motivation as Jesus Christ,
right?
Which is, everybody be nice to each other.
Yeah.
Is the basis of it. But Alice Bailey's version is based on power.
Right.
It's based on a governing force exercising power over the people of the world. The method of Jesus Christ was, guys, let's just do it. Let's just be nice. Well, what's the problem with just being nice to each other? And then they go ahead and nail him to a tree.
Right.
Yeah,
no, it's true. And it's the complete flipping of the pyramid structure. With most political systems or agendas, even if there is some kind of equal distribution of goods and whatnot, there's always, like you said, there's kind of like a group that holds the key or holds kind of everybody else hostage.
Right.
And the entire account of Christ and what Jesus did was he came and he flipped that thing upside down.
Exactly.
I mean, Jesus was God, okay? God could have come in and said, like thunder and lightning storm to the, I am God and like you must obey me because I am God. He could have totally done that, but he didn't. He actually became a baby, a human, and even suffered death. So it's this complete twisting of that view. And I am very happy that God is like that and not, some kind of dictator. Which is often the portrayal that people paint of God in general, or it's Christian really God.
Right. Well, and see, that's exactly the thing. The God comes through and says, we all need to be nice to each other just because that's the way things need to be for us to work.
Yeah.
But then Satan comes in and says, I'm going to exercise power over you and, to give us the results of, if we were all being nice to each other, which, absolutely doesn't work because good begets good and evil begets evil and greed begets greed and, all that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, Satan's really clever because he's like, oh, peace? Is that what you guys want? You guys want to get along? Oh, okay. Well, you guys can get along as long as you do it like this.
If you do it my way.
If you do it my way, you guys will definitely get along,
Right.
So anyway, let's finish up. Number 9. Right. In the preparatory period of the New World Order, there will be a steady and regulated disarmament. It will not be optional. There's that iron rod again. No nation will be permitted to produce and organize any equipment for destructive purposes or to infringe the security of any other nation. One of the first tasks of any future peace conference will be to regulate this matter and gradually see to the disarming of the nations.
Yeah. This one is just so terrible. I mean, not terrible. This one is just so obvious. Okay, so, and to be, again, I'm not for, arming everybody and putting guns in the hands of babies. That's not what I'm for here. What I am against here is number 9 doesn't even mention the practice that is going to happen to make this to make this become a reality. All right. If you're asking everybody to put down their guns and just simply asking them, and say most of them do it, but what's going to happen to the one who doesn't?
Right.
Well, number 1, if everybody has already put down their guns and one guy still has his, he's going to be the one who, takes over.
Right.
But of course, in order to keep that from happening, there's going to be a ruling class, a ruling government that's going to be the one with the most guns and the most everything. It's just putting power into putting the gun into a single man's arms,
Right. Put down the gun or we're going to have to shoot you.
Yeah, put down the gun or I wish. Everybody put down your guns or I'm going to shoot you. See, you know what I mean? So the key to all of these steps that we disagree with is the means to which it comes to this end.
Yeah.
I guess that could be what you could take away from this. Number 9, the disarming of the entire world. Sure.
It sounds great.
Sounds great. But it's not going to happen unless there's something like the UN who will be holding all the guns. And then all that does is, make one big bully instead of, a bunch of other kids on the playground who can defend themselves.
Right. Well,
So,
I think all of this, again, points to a lot of the biblical prophetic things that were said. It sets it up for an external person or persons, most likely a person, the world teacher, Maitreya, the Christ. And it really just makes some of the things written in the Bible just jump out. Matthew 24:5, where Jesus strictly just says, "For many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many." I mean, that's just way straightforward. It's like people are going to come and say they're the Christ, and they're going to deceive people.
right. Well, that's the funny thing about it is, there's been a lot of people who have come and said that they're Jesus, and they usually get some sort of a little cult following, and they all end up killing themselves. Right. But that's a very small picture.
It's like a microcosm of what is supposed to happen to the whole earth.
And people say, look, Jesus said it. That's what's happening. And I say, yes, but that's not exactly what he was talking about. When Jesus says he will deceive many, he doesn't mean, 100, hillbillies out in the boons. He means nations. He will deceive nations in the name of this false Christ.
Yeah, and if we go on, Matthew 24, "For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible."
Boom.
So, I mean, even people that are like good-meaning, well-meaning Christian people or, whoever, they're also going to be deceived by this because, and I mean, this is part of something that I'm sort of passionate about is seeing this possibility, I suppose, of not, and it's really difficult to talk about with people because it almost makes you seem like you're, like some kind of know-it-all or like above the other person. And it's really not, but it comes off as that, and which is why it's really hard to talk about. But it says that it might deceive the elect. And I mean, that would mean that people that thought they were cool with Jesus and everything and all that, they would buy into this whole thing.
Right.
And, a lot of churches are into the whole, going green or that whole idea of, playing into this whole thing. And again, it's not necessarily bad on the surface, but I don't know. It's just, it gives me all twisted up because I know the deception is so deep that it makes me question almost everything, which I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing, but
Well, it could be stressful. If
it is kind of stressful, but at the same time, I know it kind of works out in the end. So, and then a couple more scriptures here. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. So, I think we've mentioned it before, but people are going to be saying peace, peace, and that's when the Antichrist is going to go from charismatic leader, world savior, to world destroyer, basically.
Right. Or the tyranny comes out.
The tyranny, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So, well, hopefully it gave some of you guys some things to chew on, to think about. If you haven't heard this material before, I would imagine most people that listen to this show know at least a little bit about Alice Bailey.
Yeah, and if not, we'll post the material. Take a look at it. She's definitely got a huge influence over much of what the enemy is doing in the world right now. So make sure to read up. And yeah, her, along with many other the esoteric writers, are the ones who are influencing the leaders of the world right now. So it is important to, keep a finger on the pulse of where the leaders are getting their information.
Yeah. And again, this plays right into what I tried to portray, at least in the movie Age of Deceit, was that at the top, Satan runs things. He has his fallen angels influencing people like Alice Bailey, in my opinion, to write these things that are going to influence society and culture and government, political, ecumenical, all this stuff. Again, it just verifies a lot of what the Bible says. So don't neglect that part of it too. And read the stuff knowing that there is a higher power that ultimately defeats this stuff. So it's nothing to be afraid of. Because people tend to get afraid and even scared of what might come down. And I don't think we're supposed to be afraid. We're talking about this stuff to expose it, as Ephesians 5:11 says, and not so much to be afraid of it. So.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in again, guys, to Canary Cry Radio. Make sure to check us out on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all those nice things. We are going to be doing more updates and things like that. Anything else, Gonz?
I think that's it.
I think that's it. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Take care.